Hello, and welcome to Living One. My name is Olivia Crossman, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you today. For those of you who don't know, Living One is Krulos's monthly webinar series, now in its 6th year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. Our first series of 2025, Attending to the More Than Human World, explores the ethics of attention, why it matters when we unhook our minds and attention from human privilege and ground ourselves in the perspectives of animals, plants, rivers, seas, and forests. Over the next 2 months, 6 incisive thinkers offer thoughtful and practical guidance on how to pay deep and loving attention to animals, plants, and the earth. Join us for another year of rich conversations to learn how, individually and in community, we can take the necessary, concrete, timely steps toward a world of peace and wellness for all Earth beings. Our guest today is Eva Meijer, a philosopher, visual artist, writer, and singer-songwriter. They write novels, philosophical essays, academic texts, poems, and columns, and their work has been translated into over 20 languages. Recurring themes in the work are language, including silence, madness, non-human animals, and politics. Meijer also works as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Amsterdam, writes essays and columns for Dutch newspapers, and is a member of the Multispecies Collective. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various Indigenous lands. I'm currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulos Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, dakubetete, coyote, bow salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Finally, we ask that all of us participate today with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. So without further ado, we welcome Izzy Clark and Eva Meijer.
Thank you so much, Olivia, for that beautiful introduction as ever. And I'm delighted to have Eva with us for the second webinar in this series, Attending to the More Than Human World. One of the reasons is that in pretty much everything I've ever written, I've used a quote from Eva's previous book, and the quote, which refers to Simone Weil, who we came across last week in Silvia Capriolio-Panizza's talk. To get to know other animals, we need to move beyond our own motivations and actually pay attention to them. To pay attention also means not immediately trying to understand them from our perspective, but rather taking the time to look at them till the light suddenly dawns. And I'm hoping very much that over the course of these 6 talks, we'll be that little bit closer to knowing how to attend until the light suddenly dawns. And Eva has gone a long way down this path. Her latest book, Multispecies Dialogues, Doing Philosophy with Animals, Children and Others, is a wonderful work that has been shared with those of you who've enrolled in the companion course for this webinar series. And that's going to be the focus of our conversation today. It is all about conversations, and it's about what you learn, what you understand, how you change when the light suddenly dawns in dialogue with the more than human. So Eva, I think you want to talk to us about listening to amphibians initially.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, Olivia, for the introduction, and thanks a lot, Izzy, for your kind words about my work. I'm really glad and honored to be here, and I was thinking that it would be good to begin with a story. So I am based in the Netherlands. I live in a small town called Landsmeer. And today is actually the first day of the amphibian migration over here. Well, in truth, it's the second day, because yesterday I already saw two small toads sitting on the road who wanted to cross. But they were really looking at each other and me like, oh, did I wake up early, or is this indeed the right day? So I think today there will be many more. And the amphibians go into hibernation in winter, and they wake up when the weather's suddenly warmer, which it is today. It's suddenly 15 degrees warmer actually than yesterday. But the problem in this town is they want to move from the gardens to the ponds, but there are many roads that are blocking their journeys. So the toads, frogs, and salamanders have been making these journeys actually at least since the 1950s. One of the older neighbors told me this. But humans have made life quite difficult for them in their gardens, but also by creating all of these roads. So when I moved out here 5 years ago, I saw them cross the street and getting hurt, getting killed. So I set up a volunteer group. We call this paddenwerkgroep in Dutch. And we help the amphibians cross. We assist them in their projects. We also try to raise awareness about these beings and change the narrative of the town. And for me, doing this job, because I get obsessed. The thing is, if you walking is saving lives, you know. So I know that if I don't, because they're out now, and I'm sitting here to you, sitting here speaking to you, I should be out there, but it's a practice. So they wake up around 7. And a little bit later when the days are getting longer, and then they slowly make their way. And it's in the whole month of March, they're making this journey. So I usually walk every evening, and walking is like a meditative practice. You need to walk slow, you need a good flashlight, and you need to pay attention. You need to also learn to see the amphibians. New volunteers don't automatically see them. Neighbors who have lived here sometimes for 20, 30 years don't always see them. The neighbors who lived here as children do see them, because they apparently saw them as children and still do. But through making these walks, I walk for about 1.5 hours, 2 hours, and looking for the amphibians. I take part in the project of seeing them, acknowledging them, being witness to their presence, and I do this with a group of volunteers who all take their life seriously, which has changed how other neighbors speak about them. I'm actually, seriously, this is not a joke, but I'm actually seeing the volunteers coming through my street right now. There's a neighbor walking with children, so they're here. Which is really nice. Furthermore, paying attention is not just connected to walking slowly and looking for them, but also through paying close attention to their agency, because when you assist the frogs, toads, and salamanders, you need to put them in the direction that they want to go, because otherwise they go back and cross the street again. So you really need to try to figure out what they want to do. And it's a very humbling practice, and it's one of the few things that always make sense in my life. I think it's one of the few important things that I do, helping the amphibians and also taking care of the lab mice who lived with me. These are the kind of practices that are always important. And I've told you this story now as Eva Meijer, but I'm also a philosopher who writes about non-human animals. And I think that in my work, I also take this kind of embodied interaction, attention for the agency of non-human animals very seriously. And this has to do with the fact that I write about language and politics, specifically the languages of non-human animals and also political animal agency. And as many of you are aware of, these are capacities that have been how do you say this? That humans have denied other animals in Western societies and in Western philosophy for a very long time, to the point where many humans think that other animals don't speak, that they don't act politically, that they are not part of our communities, and so on. So writing about these topics as a philosopher is in part, of course, a critical project. It's about diving into history and trying to work with the concepts that we have and rephrase them and reframe them in ways that make sense in multi-species realities. But it's also an experimental project. It's also something that we cannot do as humans alone, because when you as a human think about other animals, you risk repeating hierarchies, you risk stereotyping them, you risk not taking seriously their ideas of the good life. And to counter this, we need to center the voices, perspectives, and so on of other animals. We need to become attuned to them, to their forms of agency, their forms of being. And yes, this should be the starting point for thinking. So I first wrote a book called When Animals Speak, an academic book about the critical ideas that I just discussed about language and politics, and also the fact that language is political, and silencing practices and so on. But many humans ask me, okay, right, we are with you until to some degree, maybe you are right, maybe other animals do speak, but how do we speak about them, about topics like justice or reforming communities or other things? And so I decided to write a book about the dialogues that I have and have had with non-human animals, but also some other agents, including myself, to develop a different method for thinking about and with other animals. And in this method, the dialogue is actually central.
Yes, the idea of the dialogue, that sort of like dyadic back and forth, where there is this reciprocity of communication, does come out very strongly in the book. And you also get very strongly the sense of being, as a reader, in dialogue with you. The other thing that comes across very strongly in that book, I think, is what an excellent listener you are, and a listener not just obviously to the sounds, but to movement and to touch. And both when you write about your relationship with Ollie, a canine companion for some 10 years, I believe, and also with the amphibians, where learning how to touch becomes very important. That sense of embodiment within the conversation is really brought forward, and I wonder if you could speak to that.
Well, I think that as humans, we are very I shouldn't say we, because we is, and I also shouldn't say humans, because these are all generalizations. But this is also what language does. We need language generalizes. And this is also good because in this way we can speak about things. But let me phrase this differently. In philosophy, human language has been the most important tool for coming to knowledge or truth or wisdom. But there are, of course, many ways of navigating the world, of understanding the world, of singing the world, like Merleau-Ponty calls this, so expressing how you see the world. And in these different ways of being that can be species specific, but also connected to cultural practices, social relations, even individuals. Many different forms of expression and interaction play a role. And I think that for me, being in dialogue with other animals includes many different kinds of practices. And Ollie was actually the one who pointed out to me that touch is an important form of communication for many non-human animals. There are philosophers like Maria Botero wrote about the importance of touch for primates. Touch is also can have a normative function in animal cultures. But for Ollie, it really had to do with building trust and navigating the understanding that there was between us. Ollie was a street dog. He had had many bad experiences with human beings. He came from Romania, where he used to live on the street. And when he came to live with me, he was a fully formed person. So he wasn't like the kind of dog that sometimes humans have in their mind when they think of dogs, you know, like a being that needs to be disciplined or trained or taught things to fit into human society. But he had his own ideas about life and humans. Still, he was quite nervous when he came. And one of the things that he did was asking me to tell him it was all right. And I needed to tell him this by touching him. So I needed to touch his neck. And when I did this, he knew that it would be all right. He also comforted me using touch. So what he did, I very vividly recall an argument with a person who was my partner at the time, and we were in the car, and she was behind the wheel and I was sitting next to her, and we were having an argument. I was really upset and I wasn't showing it so much, and Ollie was sitting on the back seat, and he just briefly put his nose in the palm of my hand. What he also did when I was upset another time when we'd been to the vet and we had bad news about him, he sat up in the back of the car and briefly touched my shoulder with his nose. So he had these small gestures of telling me that he was with me and that it was all right. And actually, for me, he was a very how should I say this? He was the person in my life who, with him it was all right. So as long as he was there, it was all right. He has died since. But yes, Ollie has been very influential in telling me about the importance of touch. And of course, these encounters that we have with individuals are often the starting point, or they open the door to seeing the multitude of interactions that is behind that specific encounter. So I think that through interacting differently with individuals, what's happening, Izzy? Are you still okay?
Yes, he uses me as a step. He jumps up onto something I have there, and then he uses me as the thing to jump on when he gets down. It's a sign that I hadn't rescued him earlier. Anyway, sorry.
No, okay. One of the cats here does this as well. So yeah, I think that touch matters, but of course, sight, hearing, scent, all of these other senses also play an important part in dialogues with other animals, sometimes between humans and non-human animals, but also in their communities.
Yes, with the wild robin that I have conversations with in my garden, he will come very close to me, and he'll sing a few bars to alert me to his presence. If I haven't seen him, if we haven't made eye contact, he will make a sound, and then I acknowledge his presence. The thing that I find really interesting is how he dictates what space between us is acceptable or is not acceptable. It is his agency. He is the one who decides that space, and yet I can whistle or call him, and sometimes, quite often, maybe half of the time, he'll come over from another garden. Not if he's busy doing something else, but it's a relationship that you feel very strongly the agency of the other within those relationships, and whether it's through sound or through touch or through distance as well, what space is acceptable, and that incredible blessing when the space is smaller than it has been before, and the other person is willing to trust you in that kind of sort of location. And because you talk about the amphibians, they are wild, free living animals. Have you thought much about I do believe in your last book you thought a lot about geese, about wild living geese. So this work does translate from companion animals, the animals that you've looked after and rescued, animals that you can come upon like amphibians, to animals in the wider community.
Yes, what is the question?
Oh, sorry. I think I got distracted by my cat jumping on my shoulder. The question is, can you have conversations with animals as well who are further away from you, who aren't in your immediate realm? How far do you think the concept of a conversation or a dialogue extends?
I think what I'm searching for in multi-species dialogues is, on the one hand, clarifying these personal dialogues that exist between us and individual others, and the dialogues that take place in small communities. But I'm also very interested in my underlying aim is to think about dialogues at the level of communities, also with the aim of creating social and political change. So I, for example, have written about deliberation and the political practice based on conversations through which different beings in a community can gain an understanding or even a better or even like a better judgment collectively than they would on their own. And I've looked into how very local practices of deliberation, like the embodied encounters and conversations with the amphibians, can inform, for example, legislation, policy making, and so on. And I've also written a short book about this topic that's coming out with Vine Press in a couple of months, which is called Multispecies Assemblies. So in that book, I moved to the model of the assembly. So basically, a group of humans and non-humans come together and deliberate and make collective decisions about their space and or their communities. And this is a new political model that I developed in order to be able to take the voices and agencies of non-human animals into account, but also to better represent and perhaps deliberate with plants. Also to take the voices of human children into account, because these are often forgotten in our political thinking. And natural entities like mountains, seas, forests, future generations, ancestors, things perhaps, and perhaps others. So it's really a starting point, this book, for this kind of democratic thinking. But for those of you who are interested in learning more about this, please send me an email and I will let you know once that text has arrived. But I think it's very important to return to your question, to in our time, to think about this collective level and the political level, because the situation for other animals is so bad. And because it's paradoxical as well. On the one hand, we learn more and more and more about their agency, perspectives on life, ways of being. Of course, some humans have always been attentive to that, some human communities. But I think that in Western societies, there's this great paradox between learning more and more about the inner lives of other animals. Also, because of the work of Gay Bradshaw and others who've done a lot of important and pioneering scientific work in that regard, while at the same time we are limiting their agency and basically dominating everything more and more. So I think it's important to work in different paradigms, use different languages, and also use the institutions and practices that are currently in place as a starting point for working towards change, together with the other beings, taking their agency into account as well.
That's fantastic, a fully holistic approach, and it's represented in your work, in that you work as an activist, as a novelist, as a philosopher. You're working through different spaces individually as well as collectively with other humans and with non-humans too. I wanted to ask you, how did it's a chicken and egg situation, I suppose. What happened first, your views or your attending to other animals? And if you started attending to other animals, how did that change what you did, what you believed, how you acted, and the way that you led your life?
Well, the person who taught me how to live my life was a dog, Pika, and I adopted her when I was 20, and she was really, I made a lot of detours before that, and she was really the one who said, no, you need to walk every day, and it's okay, this is our home. She was a very wise person already from a young age, and I think I owe where I am to her. I mean, otherwise I could have also been in a psychiatric institution, or it's so that was very very fundamental. And I think that what you say, that it's a chicken egg situation, I think that my work is very interconnected with my life. So I don't really see myself as separate from the work, also because I write novels, and and this is the kind of practice. We call it work, but it's not like other work. It's more like it's a way of being. It's a way of trying to understand the world, make sense of the world, and change the world when possible. So I think that that's sort of the combination of reading. Wittgenstein helped me a lot in thinking about language, and especially once I saw that Wittgenstein's work was really good for thinking through and about languages of other animals, and this really helped me see language in a different light. And language is very much at the core of my work, because I also work as a songwriter, a poet, and so I work in many language games. I like and in every genre you can say something else. You can say something else in a novel than you can say in an academic text. So it's really a great freedom. But there have been more people, non-human people, who helped me form my views, and I think that it's a constant process of learning. I've become very interested in learning and education as well. Recently, I think that learning is underestimated in our societies, in politics, also in philosophy. So I also appreciate that you are doing this kind of work with the center, trying to collectively get somewhere, take learning seriously. But yeah, it's the back and forth. It's the conversations that I had with other animals, the conversations that I had with my work, the conversations that I had with humans that have shaped me. And one of the things I try to do as an artist and also as a person is to be as porous as possible. So I think that very often in Western thinking, there's this idea of the self as an autonomous unit, and this is really prized. It's a great thing if you are very autonomous, and of course it is. But autonomy is not in opposition to being porous and being open to the world. And I think in order to be able to write good things, you need to be open to what is not you. So you need to be able to set aside what is you or the ego, because if you want to write a book and your ego gets in the way, it's going to be a bad book. You can't think of a book. You can't. It's ridiculous. You need to let the book speak for itself. Tune into the book, and then you can write it. And it's the same in interaction with other animals. If you immediately put your ego into the conversation, then it's not going to work. It really begins with listening. And I really like the Taoist concept Wu Wei, which is a kind of attentive attunement. It literally translates as not doing, but it's basically knowing when to act or not to act. And the only way you can know when to whether to act or not to act and how to act is really by attending to the world around you, the projects of all of the others around you, and what unfolds and evolves around you. So opening up, attending, and just being in service of the world, in a sense, is also how I see my life and my work. I'm speaking right now, but I don't really matter. It's more I'm simply something that is between the ideas and the text and you here right now.
A conduit for between the ideas and the listeners, as it were.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. It really sort of like helped me to think about a lot of things. One thing is that when I spend time sitting with trees, pretty much everything I feel coming from the trees aligns with the Tao. So that's but I won't take us down into my deep dark roots with Quercus roba. I was wondering if you talk about the practice of working, attending to the lab mice, attending to the amphibians. Do you engage in any particular meditative or mindfulness practices, or are the practices of attending sufficient for the process of unselfing that you describe?
Well, I think that yes, I meditate as well. I run as well, which is also a kind of meditative practice. I practice the piano, which is in a sense also, I play a lot of Bach lately. That's basically all I do. So my neighbors also know all the tunes that I play all the time. So I think that there's a kind of unselfing in these different practices that are, I like meditation for creating space, I think, creating the space next to life, and understanding that that in a sense, that what there is all there is. But I think that I have 2 young cats living here, and they really enjoy playing. So we also play for a very long time, which also has this meditative aspect. So I think what I'm trying to say now is that I try to not separate the meditation from the life, but try to do everything with attention, because that's most fun, right? Otherwise it's not that much fun. And I should maybe also say here that I've been ill for 2 years. I had long COVID, and I've been quite unwell. I've been for some months I was like really unable to do anything, and this has and it affects everything. So it affects your social life, your cognitive situation, your all your capacities. You can't stand, you can't read, you can't speak. And the trees in the garden here and my houseplants have been very good for me. They've helped me to by showing me how to endure a more vegetative life, because you change from an animal kind of being into a more vegetal kind of being. So I'm very appreciative of that, and I think I understand them much better now, of course, in my own limited capacities, but yeah, we're all limited and also not limited. And I think that also having been ill for so long has made me much more, it has brought me more in line and in tune with myself, because when you're ill for a long time, you are put outside of the normal stream of life. So normally you're the river that streams, and everything moves, and you get messages, and you respond, and you see your friends, and you speak to people, and you do the work, you do all of these things. And when you're ill and housebound for a long time, you're put outside of this, and the stream still continues. And interestingly, you're also forgotten in a sense. If you're ill for long enough, then life just sort of continues without you, which is a very strange experience, but also the way it should be in a sense, and also the way it shouldn't be. But from that perspective, I've not lost the perspective next to the river. So I'm back in the river now, fortunately, and a lot of people are not so fortunate. So I do want to say that as well. Just in the Netherlands, 500,000 of people have long COVID, and about 100,000 are really permanently disabled and have been ill for a long time. But yeah, so I think that going back into life with this experience, which is still quite fresh in my mind, because it's I've been well for a couple of months. I don't even know if I'm well, but yeah, it has to do a lot with time, because we take time for granted. Normally in our life, we feel that there's enough of it, but with long COVID and other post-acute infectious syndromes, you get sort of stuck in time. Time changes, and this also has made me more attentive to the different time scales on which other animals live and the trees. It has made me much more attentive to captivity. I thought a lot about the animals in industrial farming, in labs, but there's a lot more that I can say about that. But I think that when you speak about meditation, trying to make attention part of your life, it matters a lot to to be with yourself. And I of course, hope that none of you will get that condition, and that you don't need that kind of experience to understand this. But life is here, and it's very precious if you can live it in a way that suits the kind of being that you are.
Eva, thank you. That was thank you for opening up to us and sharing that. I appreciate it. Before I hand over to questions from the audience, just a utopian type of question. If everyone were to attend in the way that we're seeking to encourage people to attend through this series, using the different practices that our speakers bring forth, how do you think the world could be, should be, might be different?
I'm hoping that we would develop new practices of care, and new practices of community, new practices of collectivity. Also because attending is not just, it doesn't make life easier, right? It also makes life harder, because you also attend to the suffering and the difficulties. And I already said when we spoke a bit before the session started that many of the amphibians get hurt or get killed, and sometimes when they're hurt, I need to kill them. So it's a great practice, and it's great to be able to do it for them. But it's also very difficult, and it's also something that you carry with you. And I think that that's true for attending more generally. Life is short, and it's just a crazy premise to that we're thrown into when we get born. So attending also means attending to the violence and to the difficulty. So I hope that we would be able to counter this with new forms of care and community. And I do think that there are already many practices and traditions and rituals that can show us the way. And I also do think that for this we can turn to the wisdom of other animals. So this is, I think, the one hopeful thing that we as humans have, that we don't need to do it alone, and that there are all of these others who might know how to live life much better than we.
Yes, I think perhaps many of them do have that wisdom. Thank you so much, Eva. Now, I'd like to open up to questions from those of you who are listening. Feel free to raise a hand or just unmute your mic. We have got some questions in the chat, but it would be nice to hear your voices and see your faces if you're willing to do so. Katerina, yours was the first question in the chat. I don't know if you'd like to. Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that we often speak about how we can be, they pay attention to the agency of the animals or think about their rights. But how do we practice it? You had some examples, but I'm doing a lot of experiential learning. I'm wondering what you are doing to assist people to be more, to listen more, to open up more to the language of other beings.
Well, I think that this can, thank you for the question. I think that this can take different forms. So as I said before, I write books. So I actually write lots of books. And I think that these can reach humans in different ways. So some people, I wrote a book about Len Howard, for example, a bird scientist who actually existed in the 1950s. And and she's great. And I wrote a novel about her life, but I've heard from a lot of people that they saw birds differently after they read this book. And of course, not all of us write books, but there are many things that and the activism that I do, for example, with the frogs and toads, but also for the lab mice, and I write for the newspapers. Also, all is, I think, aimed at trying to make other humans see these animals differently. But I think that in the end, we can all do it in our daily lives and work. So it really, I really think that in terms of activism, we all have our own strengths and specific skills that can play a role, and how this works specifically with tending to other animals would really depend on the context and the kind of things that you usually do. One of the things that I do is, which he briefly mentioned in the beginning, is that I'm part of a multi-species art collective. So in our collective is another human and a couple of dogs, and we create work for non-human audiences. So at the moment we are working in the city of Delft, where we are making a fountain for the insects and the birds. It's in a space next to an art center. It's part of an exhibition there. And what we are doing is making a modular fountain, so we can ask the birds and the insects what they like most. So we're really looking at how to deliberate with them materially. And in addition to the fountain, we also have some conversations about water justice with different human groups: a group of children, a group of neighbors, a group of policymakers, because humans assume that humans have a right to the water, but other animals obviously have too. And we are in the Netherlands now going to experience drought, which is very interesting for such a wet country, so close to the sea. But because of the climate change, there will be less and less water. So this is a conversation that we need to have. And I'm really hoping that sort of the conversation that we have with the with the animals around the fountain can connect to the conversations that we have with the humans.
Thank you for sharing that, because examples of what we actually can do, like learning by doing, I think is so powerful. I really love reading the books and I'm getting inspired that way, but just hearing about practices. So thank you a lot for sharing.
And I'm also I've done some listening walks, for example. Where you walk with a group of people, and I give them exercises so that they can, for example, listen with your feet, and then they walk for a bit, and they can discuss with each other what they heard, and then the idea is to become more attentive, I think, simply to the surroundings, but also to find the language with others to speak about what you experience.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And the language to speak about it, I think that is important, and a group of people with whom you can speak about it with. Two questions, if you don't mind waiting just a moment, Ralph. Mary Beth was first up with the raised hand. So Mary Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is such a lovely talk. First of all, just thank you. My mind is just going, yay, with ideas. But in my life, a lot of times I come across wild beings. And so I wanted to know if you could speak to how to listen to non-human people who you may only encounter once in your life, as opposed to our companion animals or the backyard beings that we may see again and again. So I just wonder if you could speak to that. And I also just wanted to say that when you were talking about the council, I kept thinking of Joanna Macy's work, the work that reconnects, and she has the Council of All Beings, where people come together and they don't actually have non-human people there. They have people who pretend to be non-human people. I mean, it seems like powerful work, but what you're talking about takes it a step further and a step in an even better direction. But anyhow, my question is just with non-human people that you may encounter just once.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's something that I was also thinking about in relation to the assemblies, actually, and I think that there are that it's very connected to why you would want to listen to them. So, for example, when you don't encounter them, but you know that you are sharing the same space, you need knowledge about them, perhaps, and you need imagination, and you need to sort of do it more in your inner dialogue or in conversation with other humans. So the listening would not be based on the actual attending to that person, but on trying to create a better map of the situation so that you can live in harmony, in a sense. But when it's really someone that you only meet once because they are passing through and then they're leaving again, then it can simply be a nice fleeting encounter, perhaps, if they are also into meeting you. And perhaps this encounter will show you something about a certain species or a group, or connect to an earlier encounter you had, so fill in another story. So yeah, I think it would depend on the context and the aim of why you would want to listen to them, and also what they want from you in that situation. So this is not really a very practical answer, but I think you know what I mean.
Do, thank you. And yes, what you're when you said be as porous as possible, that's what comes back to me when you were speaking just now. If I'm as porous as possible, then when they pass through or when we have an encounter that's brief, and if I'm as open as possible, then I can feel what they need to communicate, perhaps.
Yeah, I very often find birds who are injured, and so I'm just it depends a bit on the season, but there are always these kind of peaks, and then and these are brief encounters, and we have an animal ambulance in the Netherlands, so it's usually about taking them with me, putting them in a box, and handing them over to the animal ambulance, but it's always very important, and it's always very it leaves a huge mark on me, you know, all of these beings, because they need assistance, obviously, and it's it's still a matter of being there completely with them. And there's one other thing that I think about now, is that time also is sometimes faster and sometimes lasts for a very long time. So something that's only brief can be very important too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ralph.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh. I'm so sorry to hear of your illness, Eva.
Yes, I've been kind of out of it. And one of the things with long COVID is that you don't have the energy to speak about it with others,
Right.
you know, so you can't communicate your position, because it takes too much energy.
Your extended impairment put me in mind of thinking about disability, and I'm wondering if you have any reflections on its relation to animality in both directions. Does disability help us think through the animal condition, and does animality help us understand the disabled and disability better?
Well, yeah, thank you for asking about that. I had a conversation with Christopher Sebastian. I'm organizing a series of talks, long COVID plus conversations, and we really dive into that in relation to long COVID and non-human animals. More generally, I like the work of Sonora Taylor, that you also know.
Yes.
Her books, Beast of Burden, but also Disabled Ecologies, in which she does not focus so much on animals, but more on the landscape and ecological changes, is very illuminating, I think, because she really, looks for similarities and dissimilarities and tries to entangle the power relations that construct animals and disabled humans. And she also looks at the material connections, the systems that make all of us ill. And I think that this last point is very important, because the planet is ill and probably won't recover completely, in the context of climate change, species extinction, and so on. There are many animals who are ill or disabled in intensive farming, but also connected to human forms of pollution and so on. And humans are also getting sick. There's like a strong relation between different zoonoses and climate change. And yes, there are many interconnections. And I think that one of the things that Sonora Taylor writes is that we have this extreme focus in neoliberalist societies on getting well. We've spoken about this in relation to depression as well. There's like this idea of, oh, you're ill, and then you need to get well, and that's you're the sort of the person who needs to do that, and then you're successful. But in this day and age, and perhaps it never was, it's not that, it doesn't work like that anymore. So we need to look for new ways of dealing with sickness, disability, for humans and non-humans, and develop new multi-species practices of care. And one last thing is that I think that for me, what I said, that I became much closer to the plants and the trees, also made me a bit of an Aristotelian. I really understood how important it is to flourish as the kind of being that you are. And I never really had a feeling for that before. So, and this is of course true for all animals, and also the fact that we rob so many animals of the possibility of flourishing as the kind of beings that they are is such a great injustice. So yes, in a sense, maybe species being suddenly became important, even though I'm always against species.
Okay.
Speciesism, but even species. Thanks.
Fantastic. Gosh, that's got so many things that make me want to dive into Google searches and explore further. Judy McKinley, there's a question in the chat. I don't know, Judy, if you want to ask it or if you want me to read it on your behalf. Give you the option of upping your microphone. Okay, I will ask. Judy's, thanks you ever so much for sharing. Oh, you're there. Brilliant.
I'm on my cell phone and I just could not find the microphone. Thank you for such a wonderful talk, and also participants. I just could feel you. It's just really just such a treat. Thank you.
Judy, you're muted again.
You have to rediscover that elusive button that didn't want to be found on the mobile phone. I'll start reading, and Judy, as soon as I hear your voice, I'll shut up so that you can take over.
I've got it. Okay. But you're doing so well. I'll try to squeeze it in. I'm not going to touch anything. Eve, how have you come to think of death from other species perspective. And what I mean, one example of what I mean, because you can go many places, but if we eat a carrot to eat, even in the lightest of scenarios, something else dies. And so I've been thinking a lot about what is the perspective of other creatures of this cycle of death and life and sharing and like interbeing, and how you've come to think of that and what you've learned about that.
Yeah, thank you. I in the book Multispecies Dialogues, I discuss a dialogue with the North Sea, and in the Netherlands, the sea has always been a close neighbor, and the sea obviously has agency, but it's a very different kind of agency than non-human animals have, and when I was writing this chapter, I was reading the work of my friend Miek Swamborn, who writes about seaweed. And I became interested in connecting critical animal studies to critical plant studies, because in critical plant studies, there are a lot of parallels between these fields. Plants, just like animals, plants have very complex systems of communication. There are more and more scientists arguing that they are in fact sentient, so that they can have experiences and respond to these. And they have been silenced too in Western discourses. At the same time, there are a lot of differences between animals and plants. For example, with regard to eating and death. So plants can generally continue to live even if you take up to 90% of them. And of course, that's a lot. It's much better to take a third or something. And animals die when you would do that. So it's a completely different way of existing of different beings, and I think that we and this also means that respect means something else in relation to a cow or to seaweed, because you can eat the seaweed and the seaweed will still live unless you eat all of it, but you won't, and you can't eat the cow without killing her. So that's one thing that I wanted to say about death. And it's very fruitful to look at these fields in tandem. And Greta Gard, an ecofeminist writer, wrote a really nice chapter about this as well that I recommend. So critical animal studies and critical plant studies have a lot to say to each other, and humans working in these fields should be more attentive, I think, to the other field. Another thing that I thought about was the laboratory mice that I adopted, 25 of them in total, and they only live 1 or 2 years. The oldest mouse was Spooky. She lived 2.5 years. And she actually became my friend at the end of her life, which was a great honor. But living with these mice showed me the whole circle of life 25 times, because first they were young and they were trying to figure out life, and they had been in a laboratory and then in the shelter for a while, and then they lived here. So it was quite a difficult task for them. They began developing their communities, and they and then you're kind of middle-aged and you have your project and life, your projects and life unfolds, and you do what you do, and then you become old, you become slower, and finally you die and you return to the silence. And witnessing that in so many beings was a very transformative experience, and it also helped me to see the death of other beings close to me differently. For example, Ollie, my dog friend that we spoke about, but also my father, who died in a week in which 3 of the mice died. And of course, all of these deaths carry their own weight, and they have a different meaning in my life. But at the same time, death is death for every being. There's a really nice text from the French writer Marguerite Duras, in which she writes about the death of a fly. And she suddenly realizes that the death of this fly is the whole death, is also death. And this realization, she'd never thought about flies much before, or animals. And this realization is just, a revelation to her. And I think that's very, very true. The death of the fly is all death, and the death of the mouse as well, and our death will be as well. And at the same time, we're all part of this same system of appearing and disappearing, and it's also completely what would be a good word? It's just part of it. It's part of the whole.
Yes, that's so wise, so profound. I think that's beautifully expressed. I don't know, Judy, if you wanted to come back.
Oh, thanks for asking. I'm just sitting here kind of taking it in, and I was thinking about, certain cultures who think the whole thing about reciprocity and respect. So for some cultures, I think the sand culture, for example, animals, they connect with the animal. And so they think of the animal as sort of like, in human terms, sacrificing themselves or offering themselves. And so I try to think about, because factory farming, I just think we'll be so shocked at ourselves that we're so casual about, who we eat in the future. And at the same time, there is this cycle, there is this we are all connected, literally, we're all one, and then we're kind of perceive ourselves as individuals, and we morph into others, and we carry our perception of death, and then sometimes we withhold our perception of death. Both of those happen. So we can overimpose our notion of this, of how we think of dying, because we're very afraid of it and uncomfortable with it. And then we can also just ignore, go into denial about what death is, and the manner of death. So these are just my own reflections about what it's, and then just to think of myself as I cross over and my body releases, and how I can, in my consciousness, also release that, because I'm no more, no less. Does that make sense?
Should I say something, Izzy, or do you want to say something?
Yes, I think Judy was asking you.
Or anybody. I'm just, Thank you for listening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the only thing I want to say about animals consenting to sacrifice, I think that's a very problematic narrative. So unless you can have a proper conversation about that and take them seriously, I think that they cannot consent and would not consent to these kinds of practices.
Thank you. We just had a question from Anne about, you mentioned the text Marguerite Duras. Is there do you have the book title?
Well, Yes, I think I have it over here.
Look at this. This is live library services.
It's called Writing, and this book has 3 essays, and it's the first essay. It's called Writing, simply. So Marguerite Duras, Writing. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to put up their hand. Oh, there is. There is. Gay, please.
Hi, if we have a little time, thank you so much. It's wonderful. See if I can organize my thoughts. There's so many beautiful things that are being woven together. Mary Beth, hi. It's so wonderful to see you. I just wanted to encourage everyone to pick up a book if you don't have it, that Mary Beth and Gordon Haber, her co-author, wrote about wolves and moose. It's incredible, beautiful among wolves. You asked about I'll just share my experience in terms of these moment encounters with someone. And in my own experience and my practice is just my practice is mindfulness and meditation, in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, if you want to put a label on it in that way. And I know how important it is, how vital it is for me to really try to cultivate and maintain a very peaceful, very centered, very open mind state. That I live among the deer and all sorts of animals here in Southern Oregon, and they're extremely, even though we're not having necessarily a one-on-one intense conversation like I have with Mama Deer, whom I've known for 12 years, everyone is so really, this is my experience, everyone is so tuned into, for lack of a better term, the energy and the consciousness. So in terms of just these, one encounters as such, that to me is why I cultivate. It's not just for one, but I think that that's a critical kind of thing, is to really maintain and try to cultivate this very peaceful, very open, very respectful, however you want to call it, mindful state in that way. And then the comment, that you made, Katerina, nice to see you, was also, and Eva, that you were discussing is, practices. And I, for me, again, I think the most important, of course, that's what a large part of Kurulas is now organized around, are guiding and facilitating and encouraging practices of mindfulness through meditation. And the mindfulness, to me, really gets down to is sort of an active training of deconstructing these imperceptible to us barriers that with other, not only just other quote unquote non-humans, but other humans. So in the sense of the practice is this deconstruction or disabling. And I guess lately, because of my own health issue, I'm calling it mindfulness, a kind of a chiropractic adjustment of humanity's mentality to what we're calling nature consciousness in that way, which is this unity. So those are just kind of 2 comments in that way. And the other about language, and thank you so much for bringing that up. I used to study linguistics, and it's always been around. So I've had a hate-love relationship with what we call language and everything. And I find that for me, in my experiences with a lot of the animals that I live with and the trees, is that it's almost like a kind of an embroidery, or kind of like dots of paintings, so that the exchange with us sometimes, kind of gain low or high the importance of the language itself, because there's so much of a deeper consciousness of communication that's going on, which again is either, low or high or medium in terms of the flow relative to, I think it's largely my own psychological barriers and compartmentalizations and projections, which have been conditioned growing up where I did, not my own family, but in this world in that way. And then the other is that I'm working with one of my rabbits rescued who came here, Alain. It looks like it could be encephalitis, but it could be also the stroke. He has symptoms of those things. And so that's that's something to be reported, but it's a very and with the animals that have mainly rabbits, but not all, have lived long lives relative, like your mice, relative to their lifespan, to really to be there for them in what they quote unquote need and hear that they need, really is again requiring this sort of divestment of any sense of self other than being an instrument for them, trying to be an instrument, as he is now navigating this psychophysiological and spiritual new terrain. So that's kind of like all rolled into one, but those are just some thoughts. But thank you all so much.
Thank you. That sounds very beautiful, all of it, and especially also the last bit. One of the guinea pigs here is ill at the moment. I've rescued guinea pigs upstairs, and she had quite a bad day. So I know what you mean with being an instrument and yeah, being there for them. Thank you.
If you just had another couple of minutes, Eva, there was one question that I did want to ask you before we wrap up. But I understand that you've got important work with the amphibians and that you're feeling that you're not there with them. So I don't know. It's up to you.
Yeah, no, please ask. I think my volunteers have it all covered. So
that's all right then. I didn't want to be responsible for Toad's suffering. I was wondering about the part of the arc of our series over the whole of the year is seeing the unseen, and one of the things that we've been thinking about, and I've been thinking about, is all those absent beings in industrialized farmland, in woods that have had the ancient trees removed and the soil with all its microbiomes, microbes in it ploughed up so that they're all broken and the soil is no longer what an ancient woodland soil would be. And obviously in my country, no wolves, no lynxes, no bears, no sort of like large carnivores. And I'm wondering if there is something that if we can also attend to the already gone, to those who are no longer there, to those who are absent. Is that something that's involved in your sort of practices and your thinking as well?
yeah, thank you. It's a very important point, and I think that this is something that we need new rituals for, and new ways of perhaps in some cases also reparations, when there are beings that we can make the reparations to, but also I think more of a cultural vocabulary in our societies, because I think that there's a whole range of these sentiments. For example, missing winter. So in the Netherlands, we don't have winter anymore. We don't have the snow anymore. We don't have the ice anymore. When I grew up, I could ice skate, but it's not possible anymore. When you speak about those who are gone, I think of all the frogs and toads and salamanders who are dead, who didn't make it there. I often think of them when I help the ones who are alive, and I've written poetry about them as well, which is maybe a way of giving, paying respect to them in a sense as well. So I think that this is one of the entry points in working towards more sustainable multi-species societies, is to collectively recognize the losses that you speak about, and also to develop practices to to honor them, sometimes also connected to already existing rituals and practices that have been forgotten or pushed away by dominant cultures. Is that an answer?
Yes, it is an answer. I feel very moved by this. The idea of rituals to honor those who've gone, and those who are going as well. There are a lot of sick trees in my country. So yes, we maybe need to work on rituals as well as another practice that Kerelos could get involved in. Eva Meijer, thank you so much for your time this evening. And I've said to you sort of personally when I invited you to do this, you've been such an inspiration to me. And I've read your sort of popular book about animal languages, your philosophical book about animal languages. This new one, Bird Cottage, the book about Len Howard, is absolutely fabulous. I fully recommend it. It led me to also read Len Howard's books, which are incredible. Anyone who's got any interest in birds as individuals is, must read. And that's all thanks to Eva. And in fact, Sylvia's work, when I first met Sylvia, our speaker last week, I was so inspired by her work because I understood it through my entry via your work, Eva. So, this course is so closely related to the two of you that I can't thank you enough. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who was here listening and asking questions, but also the ones who quietly listened and paid attention, because I think that this is always the best gift that we can give to anyone, right? Our time and our attention. So thanks a lot for that, everybody. And of course, Izzy, to you for inviting me, and to Kerelos for having me.
Thank you. I hand over to Olivia.
Thank you so much, everybody. And Eva, thank you so much for being here with us. Our next speaker will be 1 week from today on February 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We will welcome one of our guests here today, Ralph Acapora, who has written extensively on animal philosophy, and we are really looking forward to chatting with him. So hello, Ralph, and we'll see you next week, and hopefully everyone else here today. If you enjoy Living One and feel called to support Kerelos Living One and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link on our website, kerelos.org. For those of you who have not already joined our Living One course, which is an add-on to this free webinar series, you are still welcome to do so. We have recordings of the session you've missed, and you're welcome to join at any point. So to learn more about that or enroll, you can visit, again, our website, kerelos.org, or you can contact us at contact@kerelos.org to learn more about that opportunity. If you're interested in getting more involved with Kerelos, you can join us every Wednesday at 12 Pacific time for Vital Breath for Earth, silent meditation. And once again, thank you everybody for joining us today and being here with us, and Eva for sharing your time and wisdom. It's been really wonderful. So thank you everybody, and we'll see you next week.